On Monday, April 23rd of this year, as Toronto was enjoying a glimpse of sunshine after a recent ice storm, one Alec Manassian decided he'd go on a murderous rampage with a rental van at around 1:30 in the afternoon. He attacked unsuspecting people, most of those women, as they were out soaking in the sun, celebrating the end of a long winter. Little did they know that momentarily their lives would be snatched away from them. This story hit me especially hard because of how close it felt. The street they kept showing on the news, the store signs, the place he had finally stopped his van, were all so familiar to me. This was my bus route from several years ago. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Being a woman, the incel connection in this mass murder felt even more horrifying, more personal. I mean, every attack that you hear about on the news is horrific, and your heart bleeds for the victims and their loved ones. But when it's right in your home city, when it's on streets you are so familiar with, when you are the targeted demographic, that feeling is intensified by 100. And so, it's been especially difficult to not throw up as I've crossed paths with conservative think pieces in the aftermath of this. They casually discuss the redistribution of sex as if it's just economics and not a deeply intimate personal act, as if something is owed to these violent and bitter men. The ones making excuses, trying to placate them as a solution, are coincidentally the ones not at all engaging with who this group is. Not for a second comprehending that it isn't a lack of sex that's the problem here. It is their deep, intense, burning hatred of women. That's what any responsible journalist should be addressing right now. Not how to satisfy these woman haters with violent fantasies of control and domination. I mean, just when you think the right-wing takes cannot possibly get worse, here they are, portraying these self-dubbed involuntary celibates as have-nots, who get no pity or sympathy, unlike the have-nots of money, those who starve and can't afford basic necessities of life. That's who the incels are being framed as, the poor, the underprivileged, just trying to survive. Not freaks who dream of a reality like The Handmaid's Tale. We've got conservative op-ed writers and tenured professors wringing their hands trying to figure out how to solve things for these poor, deprived men who turn into murderers because they don't get orgasms. And women are supposed to be the hyper-emotional ones, unable to deal with harsh realities? Psh, give me a fucking break. The same men who complain about the so-called victimhood complexes on the left are writing excruciatingly stupid think pieces about what boils down to orgasm, quote-unquote, inequality. Not getting laid isn't a form of inequality, you fucking dumbasses. It's a part of life that many, many, many people have gone through at some point and managed to remain non-murderous through. I feel like this is an even more pathetic form of apologetics than those who blame jihadists' murderous desires on them being mistreated as immigrants. I mean, fuck off with that too. I'm an immigrant, and frankly, that's insulting to immigrants. Can you seriously believe they are trying to make orgasm inequality an actual thing comparable to wealth inequality? This is the height of privileged, fragile, entitled, pathetic thinking that does not understand what inequality or injustice means for a person. Now, I'm pretty sex positive, but I don't think that means entitlement to sex. And the fact some people do, well, that's pretty telling. I mean, if you need to get yourself off, fucking masturbate. Get a sex toy, warm up an apple pie, I don't fucking care. Doubling and tripling down on your hatred for women, though, is not a way to get laid. A lot of these genius redistribution of sex types seem to be suggesting sex bots, as if, technically having an orgasm into something that looks like a woman is the issue here. Clearly, these people have access to sex toys now if they want them. They have access to even pretty real-looking sex dolls if they want them. That is not the solution because they want to dominate and control real women, Getting off with a sex bot or a sex doll doesn't accomplish that. Do you see? I mean, it's almost like these assholes writing these articles have a soft spot for murderous, violent incels. I don't know what other way to see it. And there's been another disturbing theme I've seen around on Twitter. People keep suggesting sex workers as if they're not human beings, but instead they are some dumping ground for us to send our incel garbage to. Fuck no, they don't exist to satisfy the men that fantasize about murdering them. Please think before you suggest other living, breathing human women as a receptacle for these incels' shriveled up dicks. Sex workers already encounter men who hate them, kill them, rape them. Please, please don't offer them up as a human sacrifice for the vile sex rage of these hateful men. I mean, there are plenty of people who are involuntarily celibate who do not turn this into rage at the rest of the world. In fact, the term was first coined by a Toronto-based woman who wanted to create a way to describe her journey and experiences with sexuality and dating or lack thereof. She does not like what the term has become and is described in an Elle magazine article as saying, like a scientist who invented something that ended up being a weapon of war, I can't uninvent this word nor restrict it to the nicer people who need it. And it is unfortunate that it's been appropriated for a far more sinister purpose than intended, but I think it's important in this climate to familiarize ourselves with such terms. Things like incel or MRA, men's rights activist, or MGTOW, men going their own way, PUAs, pickup artists, and there's plenty more too. They rely on the mainstream not knowing, not understanding the larger context to spread their hatred. They manufacture situations with plausible deniability, just like the alt-right, which has a big overlap with the Manosphere. The 2018 brand of extremism relies on a lot of internal group jargon, LOL meme wars, that seem harmless or indecipherable on the surface. So if you're trying to understand it, it's important to dig into these things. Anyway, I hope you'll find this episode informative. As much of an unpleasant topic as it is, I do think it's a key one to be discussing right now. And I wanted to say, pay close attention to how both guests of mine say they fell into either researching the Manosphere or participating in it. They came through the atheist scene to this. I seriously had no idea that that was their trajectory before I spoke to them on this episode. There's something pretty horrendous bubbling under the surface in the skeptosphere. And I know I've been saying that a lot, but I feel like it just gets more and more relevant and necessary to acknowledge that, especially when the most prominent voices won't. So yeah, I found that particularly disturbing and also relevant to my last episode about the atheist alt-right overlap. Now, I have to say I'm quite nervous releasing this episode being a woman. Every female journalist or commentator I've read on this topic has said they have received endless threats and harassment from the Manosphere just for covering it. So I hope that because I am super small time that doesn't happen. But I can't help but be anxious. I even got a comment on Twitter from someone saying they hoped I would be charitable to the views of incels. I mean, who are these people and why would they expect that of me? It would be so much easier for me to just stick to the easy peasy, approved and much loved Islam bashing, especially considering I'm an ex-Muslim who grew up in Saudi and could well use that to my advantage. But somehow I keep finding myself in the position of not going that route and being nervous about releasing an episode that is bound to piss off rather than pander to the bullies. I think I might cover some light conversations for a couple of episodes after this one. I need the break from the stress. Anyway, before we get to the actual episode, as always, I would like to thank my new patrons who help keep the show going. As old patrons leave, new ones coming in are much, much appreciated. Those who've been with me for ages, those who up their pledges, those who send me PayPal gifts, all of you, really, I can't thank you enough. You motivate me to keep going. And because of you guys, we're closer to the 250 patron mark where I'll be doing my second patron AMA. So if you enjoy the show, please support and help us get to that AMA sooner. And best of all, you'll be able to participate and send in questions if you're a patron. As I've said before, there are thousands of you who listen, but only a handful of those support the show. These things are risky and some episodes feel particularly hard and draining. Any support I get is more motivational than you can imagine. And if you can't support via Patreon, please leave a good iTunes review. I'll leave the link in the show notes. Oh, and I wanted to address the fact that some of you have said that if you're searching me on the Patreon app, I don't show up. I switched around some settings and hopefully I'm more searchable via the app now. But just in case, the link to my Patreon is in every outro, also in the show notes, and I'll just plug it right here too, patreon.com/nice mangoes, no E in mangoes. And before you think this episode is too serious and dull, let me just say that as horrific a topic as misogyny and the Manosphere is, some of the shit they want and some of the shit they say is just so absurd, while at the same time horrific, that it cannot help but make you laugh. So strap in and get ready for a wild, meandering ride through misogyny land. We did still have a lot of laughs, so hopefully that'll balance out some of the heaviness of this topic. You can follow Kevin Logan at KFLogan on Twitter and David Sherratt at alternate_facts. Use a 4 instead of an A for alternate. And do check out Kevin's really entertaining Descent of the Manosphere series. I'll link that in the show notes. And now, the episode.
Make sure that that program doesn't contain controversial subjects and you're not impolite to people.
No, definitely not, Dad. You know me. I'm never, ever controversial or impolite.
Yeah. Okay.
Welcome to Conversations with your lovable, never pisses anyone off, ex-Muslim host Aina, keeping it non-controversial. Welcome to episode 44. Today I'll be discussing the different groups that make up what's known as the Manosphere, one of those groups being incels or involuntary celibates, a term more people are unfortunately aware of since the recent Toronto attack where a van plowed through human beings, senselessly killing and injuring many, most of the victims being women. This is a topic that sadly we must discuss now as people try to make sense of this recent attack in my city, but it will involve many detailed discussions of intense misogyny, rape, murder fantasies, murders. So please, if you're sensitive to that kind of topic, proceed with caution. Now, joining me here today is YouTuber Kevin Logan. Hi, Kevin. How are you doing?
Hello there. I'm very well, thank you. I always like to have my intros led in by talks of murder and violence. That's always interesting.
I'm so sorry.
I won't be putting that on the CV necessarily, but there you go.
But I mean, it's kind of like what you do, right? Tell us a bit more about what you do.
Well, I do low-grade YouTube videos about even lower-grade people. I do videos about MRAs and MGTOWs, and actually I haven't done that many on incels just because they don't actually tend to make content of their own. They just sort of snipe from the sidelines. Exposing, I think what's his name now? We Hunt the Mammoth blog. David Sherratt. He describes as the new online misogyny, and I think that's a perfectly apt description because it's a sort of metastasization, if you will, of previous brands of misogyny but filtered through the internet, which is even more poisonous than previous misogyny was. Yeah,
it's pretty terrifying, but it's also not new, as I've come to realize. Like, this kind of anti-feminism has been around for a while. But before we get into that, we've also got another guest, David Sherratt, who is, I believe, an ex-MRA, but I'll let him introduce himself in more detail. Hi, David.
Hello. I'm a former MRA, former MGTOW, former anti-social justice warrior type. I'm pretty much just a general progressive now, and I mostly spend my time messing with far-right people on Twitter.
Yeah, so that's going to be an interesting perspective to talk to you about. All right, so tell me, David, what first led you to becoming an MRA? How did it all start?
That's a really complicated question, I guess, because I started watching a lot of YouTube videos on like the atheism religion debate, and I guess I started watching a lot of the sort of like civil war that ended up happening within the online atheist community over sort of feminism. I think I went to the Thinking Atheist forums for a while and started just discussing issues there. I was still not particularly sure about the feminism thing. I wasn't entirely on board with that. I had heard some criticisms that of certain feminist activism that made sense to me at the time, and I wanted to engage with feminists and see what their position was, and it didn't go very well. I was sort of shouted down off of forums and stuff, so I think that ended up making me quite hostile to a lot of feminists quite quickly from the start. So it sort of led me down a path of basically watching a lot of videos from people like Sargon, from people like Thunderfoot, and
who are both atheists, right?
Yeah. Who I suddenly started finding men's rights YouTubers, and at that point, when I heard like some of the complaints from men's rights activists when it came to actual legal issues, when it comes to stuff like circumcision, when it comes to discrimination within domestic violence, and the sentencing gap and circumcision, I sort of started to see that maybe there were actually legitimate issues here that needed to be addressed, and I think I was sort of pulled into the men's rights movement that way. Now, it took me quite a few years to realize the focus on feminism as just a pure enemy was it was unhealthy. And the real thing that showed that was when I ended up in a fight with the honey badgers over women's issues in the Middle East.
And who are those? Can you just explain for the audience?
The honey badgers are a female men's rights group. They do a podcast. Karen Straw and Alison Team, and I don't actually know how they're doing nowadays. I haven't been following it for the last couple of years.
They're still around, still very much doing their thing. I've actually had debates with, actual online hangout type discussions with all of them, and I've appeared on their show, and they kind of almost MRA stormtroopers, dare I say?
Oh wow! I mean, I remember coming across Karen Strawn for the first time because she, I think, went on Dave Rubin, another atheist hero.
Yes.
And she, and I grew up in Saudi Arabia, and she started talking about how she was saying some stuff about burqas and something milder on Dave's show. But then when I went and looked in to her views, she had other videos talking about how Saudi Arabia men are actually more oppressed than women.
That was this was the thing that the honey badgers kept doing on that. In that they kept using this sort of rhetorical trick where they would say, "Hey, men have all of these issues," and then downplay the women's issues, and then say, "We're not saying that men have it worse in the Middle East. We're not saying that women aren't oppressed." But every single women's issue that would ever be brought up, they'd try to like contextualize it and try to justify it in some way.
Yeah, like the driving ban. They were like, "Oh, well, they get to be driven around all the time."
I ended up having so many arguments with them over this. I remember like this long, really, really long argument I had with Karen on Skype about, I think it was about like forced marriage. Because I can't remember exactly what she said, but she said something along the lines of that women like women could legally divorce their husbands, but it was only under very, very specific circumstances. And then she like conflated one country with all of them in the Middle East and like the entirety of Sharia. So there was a lot of like, it just ended up being a lot of pedantry.
Mm-hmm. So that's kind of how you started de-radicalizing, I guess, by seeing the loopholes in their arguments when they were so absurd that they had to say men are actually more oppressed in Saudi Arabia.
I think they ended up calling me a sand feminist as well.
Oh my God!
I'm not kidding.
I did not. I did not know that was a slur. I mean, I've been called the sand N-word many times on Twitter, but sand feminist, that's a new one.
Yeah, because I'm only a feminist for the Middle East or something. That was the claim.
Oh.
I don't know.
Oh, gosh. Wow. Okay,
Yeah.
so that's an interesting path you've been down. It's got to be a hard position to be a more left-leaning some person who's kind of in this emerging from this MRA world, right?
Yeah, it really it was like I did see this sort of this issue of the entire like the men's rights movement really did have this very heavy right-wing bent when it came to the older members. But I actually know quite a few of the younger members who they were all quite quite liberal and progressive like I was.
Really?
So I mostly used to hang around those types, and a lot of them just ended up leaving. I know a couple of them are like straight up progressives in progressive circles now, and
but they've left the MRA scene.
Yeah, they've left the MRA scene just like I have, but it wasn't as public as me because I ended up being a bit like when I get into when I get out of a movement, it tends to be a bit of a public show.
So you were like what, publicly shamed or something for leaving?
Yeah, it ended up being a very, very big fight all over YouTube and Twitter, and then
wow,
that did go well.
Okay, well, I'm glad you've left. I mean, I can kind of relate because being an ex-Muslim that's left-leaning is becoming harder and harder by the day. So
yeah, that's the problem, is that like I do legitimately still believe that men's issues are important and that they need to be dealt with. And I always try to, like when I looked at a lot of the men's issues, I did try to take it from a sort of socially progressive perspective. Like it was from a perspective of like actual like gender equality and stuff.
But like feminists,
there are gender roles.
There are feminists who like tackle men's issues too. I don't know if you think that's inadequate or.
I just don't think like there's enough of it around the board. Like it doesn't matter if like I'm not talking about like this in terms of the feminists or in terms of the men's rights movement. I just don't like the issues haven't been solved, so clearly not enough has been done yet.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't really have like I don't really identify as either a feminist or a men's rights activist at this point. I'm just sort of I don't really talk about gender issues enough to really consider myself part of either movement anymore.
Okay. And Kevin, your Descent of Manosphere series has been really quite the wild ride. I've been trying to get through as many as I can before we do this recording. I couldn't get through all 50, I think there are. There's 50 or more. Kevin, did we lose you?
Oh,
we lost you there for a bit, Kevin, but now you're back. And David has a theory on where you went. What was it?
Oh yeah, he was kidnapped by incels.
Of course he would be.
They did a really quick brainwashing of me, and so now I'm back to was it to start the glorious revolution or whatever?
Oh dear gosh. Well,
state mandated GFs.
Right. So you guys maybe can help me break down this really creepy, cryptic message that Alec Manassian left on Facebook, the Toronto attack guy. He writes, private brackets recruit Manassian infantry 00010 wishing to speak to Sergeant 4chan, please. I don't know what the numbers he quotes mean, C2324961. The incel rebellion has already begun. We will overthrow all the Chads and Stacys. All hail the supreme gentleman, Elliot Rogers. So, Kevin, can you help make any sense of that?
The numbers, again, I don't know what the numbers specifically mean. I assume they're just sort of gibberish to make it look like he's an actual soldier in a war of some sort. 4chan is a reference to an online message board, 4chan.
But what's Sergeant 4chan?
Well, I presume that's just a reference to the community.
Okay.
I mean, sometimes in memes, there is a meme. I think someone at some point referred to like an individual as 4chan. It must have been some like normie journalist who'd done it. So there became this meme like there's the hacker known as 4chan. So it might be something to do with that.
Yeah, but I would assume it's just a reference to that kind of disparate community of sort of scummy far right maniacs. Frankly, I mean that's most of what that is.
Pretty much, yeah.
The incel rebellion, that's essentially like they think of themselves as this kind of, I don't know, almost like a movement. Group. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Chads and Stacys. Basically, Chad is a male who has sex, and Stacys are females who have sex.
So they're like desirable people, basically, who are successful sexually.
Well, but it goes sort of wider than that. It doesn't even have to be particularly successful sexually, just that they've had or are possibly going to have sex. And you can tell that's how far removed they are from any kind of version of reality, that they need special names for basically 99.99% of the population.
Right, yeah.
To associate as them being separate. All hail the Supreme Gentleman Elliot Rodger. I mean, Supreme Gentleman is a direct quote from Elliot Rodger. It was one of the creepiest things he put out there. He was the Isla Vista shooter who killed, was it 9 people, I believe?
6 people and injured 14.
Yeah, in about 4 or 5 years ago now.
I think it was 2014 that he did.
Yeah, and he referred to himself as the Supreme Gentleman, which is bizarre considering the previous sentences involved him going on about sluts at parties and men who don't care and all the rest of it. And that, I think, plays into it is an utter delusion. They see themselves as desirable people. They see themselves as supreme gentlemen or whatever, and they're some of the most despicable people.
Yeah,
they're fundamentally. It's not like, in general, if someone wants to be loved and wants to have relationships and stuff, and that's not reciprocated, that's sort of a shame. But with the incels as a community, I find it difficult to feel sorry for them because they're just fundamentally unlikable people.
I looked him up on Wikipedia, and it said in his manifesto he described his childhood family conflict, frustration over not being able to find a girlfriend, his hatred of women, his contempt for couples, his disgust for interracial couples, and his plans for what he described as retribution. Now, I mean, this does not sound like a normal, well-adjusted, good person.
Yeah, I mean, they're absolutely defined. And actually, the incels and MGTOWs, they see themselves as a different group, but essentially the differences between them are far smaller than either of those groups would want to admit. And they're
so can you explain what MGTOWs are? Because I'm sure the average listener will have no idea.
It's technically an initialism rather than an acronym, but let's just go with acronym, which stands for Men Going Their Own Way, which in theory is essentially, on the face of it, not necessarily even a terrible idea. The concept that if you've been burnt in relationships and whatever, you don't like the way sexual relations are in the modern world, so you essentially check out of the dating game of relationships and focus on yourself. But
that's like more voluntary, right? That's like
exactly. Yeah, and it's that's the theory of what a MGTOW is, and in sort of a sense, the theory of what an incel is. But in reality, what it is they haven't actually gone their own way. What they do is spend all of their time constantly going on about how terrible women are. It's often rather violent imagery used towards women as well. Incredibly degrading towards women, and they are defined by their misogyny, basically. Absolute defined. But you briefly touched upon it there, the Minisian's hatred for interracial couples. I've said this
was Elliot Rodger's hatred for interracial.
Elliot Rodger, sorry. That kind of bigotry, that kind of core of misogyny so often is intertwined with racism and homophobia and transphobia and various other things, because essentially anyone who isn't exactly like them is degenerate or terrible in some way to these groups. And it's dangerous in a number of ways, especially because the internet allows them to sort of group together and congeal and form this kind of airtight echo chamber of violence and fantasy. And sometimes it ends up erupting out in forms like Elliot Rodger and Alex Manessian and various other smaller individuals who have done, domestic violence and murder.
Actually, there was a massacre in Montreal in 1989 at L'École Polytechnique.
Marc Lapine.
Yes, that's the one. You know it, David.
Yes.
How come?
Yeah. I can't remember exactly. It was something that I heard feminists mention quite often. He'd been associated with men's rights groups or something like that.
Yeah, he was. So he'd been associated with CAFE, the Campaign for Equality, in Canada, which was a kind of vaguely men's rightsy group who had been supported by people like Karen Strawn and various others. And the leader of that group had in some way, I can't remember the exact quote, but in some way had essentially said that this man's misogyny was justified in some way, and essentially tried to excuse away terrorism, in essence.
Wow. Yeah, you know, when I was reading up on him, it's horrific. Like, he began his attack, this is what Wikipedia says, he began his attack by entering a classroom at the university where he separated the male and female students after claiming he was fighting feminism and calling the women a bunch of feminists. He shot all 9 women in the room, killing 6. He then moved through the corridors, cafeteria, and another classroom specifically targeting women to shoot. Overall, he killed 14 women and injured 10 other women and 4 men in just under 20 minutes before turning the gun on himself. His suicide note claimed political motives and blamed feminists for ruining his life. Pretty scary and not unfamiliar, sadly.
And you'll see so much of online anti-feminism, as it were, defending such things. I mean,
yes.
Famous example would be Sargon of Akkad, who's a famous atheist, anti-feminist chap, essentially blaming Lacey Green for perpetuating a system that led to Elliot Rodgers doing what he did.
Right, I heard that part of the rant. And he's just screaming, it's a fucking feminist system, Lacey, you know?
Yeah, and that's going out to hundreds of thousands of impressionable young people, and they are. I mean, if you look at the demographics of his channel, most of his regular repeat viewers are in the sort of 18 to 35 category.
Yeah, I mean, I actually remembered originally watching that video, and the first time I watched it, I thought he meant, like, for the sake of argument. When he said it, like, he was talking about how actually technically we're in a feminist system, so if you're going to blame a feminist system, then if you're going to blame the system, then you have to blame feminism or something like that. But then I actually went and watched it again, and he didn't do that. And I must have, like, projected some kind of overly charitable interpretation on it from not watching it properly the first time.
So how long after did you watch it again?
2 years after.
Oh, wow,
I
okay.
watched it the first time. I had some serious I had to rethink pretty much everything after I sort of ended up moving out of the men's rights and anti-feminist circles. It was a bit of a wake-up call.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Well, yeah, another example that just popped into my head, although strictly speaking it wasn't a misogynist act of terrorism, it was an anti-Muslim act of terrorism that didn't actually kill many Muslims, bizarrely. But when Karen Strand defended Anders Breivik, the Norwegian
she
terrorist,
did what?
Yeah, if you go and watch her video, I will link it to you afterwards, David. And she essentially goes through a sympathetic backstory of Anders Breivik and literally cries on camera about his plight.
Oh. Yeah. I'd seen her like basically defending the white genocide conspiracy theories, but I didn't think she'd go that far.
Yeah,
Jesus.
Well, this was years ago. This was before even really the kind of turn toward the alt-right had happened in terms of like the YouTube discussion or whatever. This was literally within a couple of months, I believe, of the actual attack. But yeah, she subsequently had Chris Cantwell, the crying Nazi, as he's known on the internet. The night after, or the very same night that happened, after Charlottesville. It
was the night before Charlottesville, I believe. It was a very short amount of time before Charlottesville that she had a chat with him, and she basically agreed with him on everything.
No, I could be wrong, David, but I'm almost certain I remember it being after, because he was saying he was going to hand himself into the police the next day. Yeah, she had him on for a discussion.
Okay. Yeah, I remember hearing about it after as well, but
yeah.
But this is the thing, though. Right.
video
These
about
people are sort of maybe fringe, but then they get endorsed by and downplayed by much larger figures, and especially depressingly in the atheist scene. So Dave Rubin, as I mentioned earlier, had Karen Strawn on and, kind of did a softball, completely non-challenging interview with this absurd person who's also, endorsed like beating women. I forget what the quote was, but it was something really horrific.
Yeah, she did. Yeah, she's. I mean, I'm something of a self-taught expert on these people. She did. She said that sometimes in relationships, domestic violence is necessary. Was one of the things she said.
Yeah, she said something along the lines of like
she said
that it should be it might actually technically be better if it's accepted, because if you discourage it, what ends up happening is the woman will wind the man up until he explodes and kills her. If he's allowed to like smack her every now and then he won't get that angry or something like that. It's some.
But she's also said stuff like Sharia. She described Sharia law as gynocentric, which is one of the most absurd things I've ever heard a human being say. That was actually at an event that David attended, the International Conference on Men's Issues.
The funny thing is, that was the one speech I didn't watch. That was the one speech I wasn't there for.
Yeah, that's fair enough, because she was talking utter.
How does one even justify saying Sharia is gynocentric?
Because she's a little bit mad. Basically, she cherry picks certain examples of. I mean, you mentioned it earlier about the driving ban. That she turns that from being an issue where women aren't allowed basic fucking human rights to they'll get chauffeured around.
Yeah, I did hear that.
How is that gynocentric in the slightest? You're denying women the basic right to be able to drive themselves or to leave the house unattended. It's ridiculous. What are you talking about?
It is absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, and Dave Rubin does softballs with people like Karen Strawn, and obviously.
But you're not allowed to say that he promotes extremists. Yeah. If you do, he's going to sue you.
Yeah, he had Stefan Molyneux. Sue me, Dave. I will happily see you in court, you fucking prick. He had Stefan. So this is called polite conversations. I apologise.
Usually they're not that polite. So go for it. Swear away.
You do bleep out the word polite in the intro. So I mean that's a thing. He has people like Stefan Molyneux on, and just has him talking about race and IQ. Like
this is a hot topic. Bullshit. Come on, the atheist scene loves this topic these days.
Well, exactly. I mean, but the thing is, if you're going to have someone on, right, you probably shouldn't have Stefan Molyneux on because he's not actually a fucking scientist. He's just a twat on the internet. But if you're going to have someone on to talk about a specific topic, at least push back. At least actually ask the journalistic question of him.
But he does push back when he has to defend, say, Lauren Southern to the Patreon dude, right? So you see where he pushes back and where he does not push back.
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
interesting.
We notice whose free speech you're protecting all the time, guys.
Right, exactly. So it's very interesting and horrifying that this misogyny does come tied in with this horrible alt-right racist crap. And I mean, your 50-part series, as I was saying before we got cut off, Kevin, it has been really eye-opening. Like of course I knew like on the surface, and I really don't want to know these things, but sadly, being a left-leaning, ex-Muslim atheist, you kind of have to learn where this sexism, where this misogyny is coming from,
Yeah, well, it's not just it's easy to see it all tied in as a bald bigotry of like misogyny and racism and all the rest of it. But there's actually, in a more insidious way, there's a kind of funneling of and there's always going to be young male anger. There's something about the chemical makeup of young men specifically.
In every part of the world. I mean, come on, like jihadists, Islamists.
Yeah, exactly. There's always going to be young, angry men. And you can deal with that constructively as societies. You can deal with that through education and through outlets for these men, and for good mental health care would be hugely important as well. But unfortunately, what we've done in the West, and it's difficult to really tackle it on the internet without being incredibly censorious in many ways, which I don't think anyone particularly wants. But you have a funneling of that young male anger from just basic bitch misogyny, as it were, which is an odd phrase, I know, but it's being funneled into a kind of alt-light, alt-right, even as far as Nazi kind of thing. And it's through the softer versions of that you get into that. I mean, Richard Spencer even described Sargon of Akkad and Lawrence Southern as good entry points to the alt-right. And it's true, they soft sell. And Dave Rubin's starting to do this now.
He's been doing it for a while. He's the even softer version with a respectable face, right? Lawrence Southern still is the identitarian, and, Sargon tweets things like, I wouldn't even rape you at, sexual assault victims, but Dave Rubin is like this supposedly respectable person who has, who has mainstream politicians on his show, and
Well, it's exactly, but unfortunately, America's gone so crazy now that mainstream politicians means all sorts of things.
Right.
You've got very far right people like Paul Nealon running for Senate.
Yeah, but it's leftist hysteria. There's nothing to worry about. Let's focus on Islam.
Exactly. The fact that they've got, I think it's now 3 or 4 out and out open Holocaust deniers running for high office in America in this year, in 2018. That's terrifying.
Yeah,
that's not coming out of the clear blue sky. You can see where these people are coming from, the swamp they're emerging from.
Yeah, and it's pretty much like their exact tactics. Their entire tactic has been to unite the right wing in general. So they basically the idea is that these right wing extremists, they coddle up to more moderate types to basically get the more moderate types lumped in with them, and then as a sort of reactionary defense, they will sympathize with the extremists more.
Yeah.
The more moderate ones?
Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, we see that all the time. I mean, even look at, as we were talking about Karen Strawn, Jordan Peterson, who is like the top conservative intellectual, quote unquote, these days, was promoting Karen Strawn on Twitter the other day. I mean, this is a woman who's talked about wife beating being okay, and she's like straight up said that that white genocide is probably happening. Right. Now, Peterson always signals to these really disturbing messages, but you can't say that because he hasn't said those words, right? These are his rhetorical strategies as well. Like, he'll say that it's worrying that men can't deal with women the same way that they would with men who would say something like calling them a Nazi, then you could just go punch a man out. But you can't do that with a woman.
Exactly. Basically soft selling the idea that punching women is a good idea.
Right. But if you say that, disgusting. You'll have 1,000 Peterson fans in your mention saying, he didn't say that. No, he just implied it.
Yeah. Unless you can give me 6 hours of quotations from him, that's out of context.
Exactly.
They really are. But as to David's point about uniting the right completely, I think there's a really good example in Jordan Peterson of me and David both come from the atheist YouTube scene as it used to be, and that Jordan Peterson would have been a person of utter derision in that sense.
Exactly, same.
Really would have been
a Christian,
exactly,
and a presuppositionalist as well.
Yes,
he literally came out and said that atheists don't exist. If you think you're an atheist, you're wrong because you can only know shit through God. Fucking mad, like Seitan Bruggencate.
He said Sam Harris is a Christian because he doesn't rob banks and stuff. Right on Rubin, I believe it was.
Isn't Sam Harris? Wasn't he of Jewish extraction anyway?
Yeah, but he's clearly a very vocal atheist, right?
Well, exactly, yeah. But I mean, even if he were religious, he wouldn't be Christian.
Well,
I don't know. But anyway.
It doesn't necessarily have like.
But you guys,
when people say this is proof of God, I say, yeah, exactly. Vishnu be praised.
But look, every good person is going to be Christian. That's what Jordan Peterson thinks.
Well, exactly. Well, being Christian is the good thing to do, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, that's mighty Christian of you. But yeah, so he would have been, Peterson would have been a person of utter derision. He would have been, a lolcow, as it's referred to on the internet. But now, people are happy to, the right, as it were, as David described earlier, the sort of civil war about feminism and the rest of it, those that are on the right of the atheist scene that have been essentially sort of grafted onto this much
Which
more
are the
extreme,
majority, don't you think?
Yeah. I think so, absolutely.
Every major
numbers,
figure
that's where the subscribers are, yeah.
is like an anti-SJW.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. But they're happy to overlook that stuff. Like, literally, Jordan Peterson saying, if you think you're an atheist, you're wrong, about all of these atheists. They're happy to overlook that because he also, talks
He also
rubbish
sells
about
tickets, right?
Cultural Marxism and
He does.
postmodernism.
Yeah.
Are things that he doesn't even fucking understand anyway, but it doesn't matter. As long as he's making the right sort of sounds, they're happy to overlook, like I say, he being a Christian fundamentalist presuppositionalist.
Yeah, this is the funny thing. If Saitem Bruggencate had just like waxed lyrical about political correctness, he probably would like be promoted nowadays.
Almost certainly, yeah. And he could. And the thing is, you don't even have to have had like a squeaky clean past in that regard. They're happy to overlook that shit, even if you come from like Dave Rubin used to be on the Young Turks, Lacey Green used to be like a kind of an SJW kind of icon or whatever. If you're happy to sort of turn your back on that and start preaching from the hymn sheet, they're happy to overlook all of that past and accept you into the fold, as long as you essentially they've got their own version of political correctness.
Quite a few of them
political incorrectness.
The funny thing is actually quite a few of them don't. A lot of I know quite a lot of anti-SJWs are actually still think that Lacey Green is some crypto SJW.
Oh yeah, look, I'm not saying they've been accepted completely, but the big noises are happy to associate themselves.
Yeah,
with
I mean, even there's like alt-right people who think Milo is gay and therefore unacceptable, right? So
yeah, that's true.
Exactly. Yeah. The Millennial Woes in the series of mine you mentioned, the Descent of Manosphere. He gives the quote about Milo Yiannopoulos not being. He tries to make the case that he's not alt-right, which to a degree he sort of isn't, but he certainly spouts a lot of the same shit. And he says, we can't have a gay race-mixing half-Jew as a leader of the alt-right.
Yeah, well, no one's saying he's a leader.
Yeah, that's true. But isn't like Millennial Woes openly bisexual?
Well, lots of them. This is the thing. We've got people like Nicholas Fuentes.
Okay, you guys have to explain who all these people are because I'm sure the audience has no idea. So who is Millennial Woes?
Millennial Woes is a Scottish unemployed man who lives in his dad's fucking basement. That's literally true.
He's like one of Richard Spencer's right-hand men.
And he's an open white supremacist, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Who has advocated violence, I believe, before, but then deleted it.
Yeah, he called for... he said that basically he's okay with slavery at one point, which was interesting, but also that refugee boats should be machine gunned.
No, it's torpedoed.
Torpedoed, apologies.
Yeah.
Sorry, I undersold it.
Yeah. In that same video, he also talks about how after the collapse, they should take down names of EU officials and politicians that should be executed for creating the migrant crisis or something like that.
Yeah. Do you remember when the media outed who he was? There was a lot of people defending him because they're saying that the media doxed him. What are your views on that? Like an open white nationalist who advocates violence, do you think that he should sort of not be investigated and known to the people around him?
Well, I find it difficult because I'm not for generally speaking, I'm not for people being outed in that way.
Sure, but when you start advocating violence, I think that...
Well, exactly. Well, the line I draw, in a sense, is not just the advocation of violence, because, the police should have investigated that straight up.
Yeah.
But also, if you're just an internet person, that's one thing. But it's when he went to America, and that's why he was outed in the end, because he went to speak at the National Policy Institute, which is Richard Spencer's fucking ragtag bunch of scumbags. He went to speak at their conference in Washington, and he actually did a whole tour of America. I outlined it in my video on him. And he spoke at several of these sort of events and stuff, including doing open Holocaust denial and advocacy of all kinds of violence, including making a list of leftist journalists for them to target.
Basically, before he got doxxed by the media, he was actually discussing creating a database of personal information of lefty journalists.
How Petersonian of him.
Well, exactly.
He
was ahead of the curve on that one.
Yeah, he basically planned to do what journalists did to him.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I sort of pointed that out in my video because I remember specifically. Again, this is how my mind worked. I remember it was at Washington State University, so in the Pacific Northwest, and he spoke there, and he said that he didn't believe the mainstream narrative of the Holocaust, basically saying it didn't happen, and said that he'd been kind of attacked in some parts of the local media there who picked up on his arrival, because the whole Zig Heil Gate thing in Washington DC had just happened, and he said that a database of leftist journalists should be made, and that they should be targeted, but then started to complain like fuck when like 2 weeks later, upon his re-arrival back in Scotland, a national Scottish newspaper outed him on the front page as like the Scottish Nazi. Mm-hmm. Well, I'm sorry, if you play the game and you get bitten by the game, tough.
Yeah, I mean, I think that he should be free to have his vile views and Holocaust denial, and he shouldn't, be outed for that. But once you start advocating for violence, then you cross a line.
There is a point at which it's basically incitement.
Yeah, of course there is.
It might be worth pointing out that I do know that there was a terrorist attack in America. I can't remember exactly where it was, but basically a white nationalist tried to push the race war a bit further forward by murdering a black man with a sword.
Yes.
Well, basically, they found his YouTube channel, and if you actually go to his subscriptions on YouTube, Millennial Woes is one of the people he watched on YouTube. So it's very possible that he played a part in that.
It's so scary to me how connected these things are to the circles that we run in. Like,
I was just going to say, sorry to cut you off, but Ben Shapiro.
The Quebec mosque shooting.
Yeah, he was literally named in the prosecution's case.
And it's ironic because he tweeted out like, haha, what is it going to be, another Mormon this time? Except
exactly.
He was wrong.
Well, they do this all the time. They did with the Alex Manosphere thing in Toronto, driving into the group of women.
Yep.
Various people made allusions to, it's definitely a Muslim. It's a Muslim. It's another truck of peace, which is one of their phrases.
I just don't understand why people cannot wait, because they can end up being embarrassed, but I guess it doesn't matter to them. No,
it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because their fans have shown time and time again that they don't care that these people are fucking liars and frauds and hucksters. They just want to sell. They just want to sell tickets, as it were. And what sells tickets is, it's the Muslims every single time.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember Paul Joseph Watson berating the media specifically for not making assumptions that turned out to be false. Like,
exactly.
That?
Why? Yeah, he was saying, why don't the media just call this out already?
Yeah, he was also saying that the mayor of Toronto is like virtue signaling, and he's not saying anything about the jihad attack or something. He's not saying that it's a jihad attack, but he doesn't know yet, and it wasn't. So what the fuck? It's so troubling to me that this overlap of the incel, anti-feminist manosphere and the atheist skeptosphere is such a large overlap. Even Stéphane Molyneux, right? He's a massive, I don't know how many YouTube subscribers he has. Does anyone have an idea?
Several 100,000.
I think it's 7 or 800,000.
And then he had this like really notorious rant about women choosing assholes, right? Let me just read it out here. Women who choose the assholes will fucking end this race. They will fucking end this human race if we don't start holding them fucking accountable. Women who choose assholes guarantee child abuse. Women who choose assholes guarantee criminality, sociopathy, politicians. All the cold-hearted jerks who run the world came out of the vaginas of women who married assholes. And I don't know how to make the world a better place without holding women accountable for choosing assholes. Your dad was an asshole because your mother chose him, because it works on so many women. If asshole wasn't a great reproductive strategy, it would have been gone long ago. And this man has prominent scientists on his show who don't do their research. This man has other prominent atheists on his show. He has Douglas Murray on his show. It's disgusting.
Well, that quote encapsulates so much of what this misogyny is. It's the holding of women to a completely different standard to men. You notice there he didn't at one point say, well, maybe we should look at men and maybe why are they arseholes and how can we change them from being arseholes to not arseholes. It's all about, the women are choosing arseholes. Well, if so many men are arseholes, lots of women don't have a choice.
Right, and why doesn't this work the other way? What if men are choosing, bad women? No, you can't blame men. It's always women.
Yeah. Well, it's setting the game up so that women cannot win, right?
Yeah.
So it's, if they dress too provocatively, they're sluts and they were asking for it.
Yeah.
If they were dressed too conservatively, they're prudes and you're probably just a feminist, lesbian, fucking Marxist or whatever. It's setting it up so they can't win. And actually, a prime example of that is another name that people might not be familiar with, a guy called Black Pigeon Speaks, who's an American nationalist.
I thought he was.
Oh, so Canadian.
He's a Canadian.
Oh no, is he Canadian too?
Yeah, he's a Canadian, but he lives in Japan, I believe.
Yes, exactly. There are so many anti-immigration people who live in the country they weren't born in.
And there's a strange thing with Japan and white nationalists or white supremacists. They love Japan.
Well, because it's pure enough that it's seen as an ethno-state. It's not actually, but it's pure enough that they're happy to go there. It's sort of their idealized version in their minds of what they think an ethno-state would be.
And also the subservience of women, and I think something about that too that they like. Just
Indeed.
So much sickness. It's
so Black Pigeons, yes, like I say, a Canadian anti-immigration guy who's an immigrant, brilliant. But also his thing, he made a video called "Women Destroy Civilizations," which is an amazing title for an amazing clickbait title. And in that, he goes on about the women who hooked up with Nazis in occupied Europe during the Second World War, and he focuses solely on the women letting down their tribe, as it were, because they're going with the enemy. But it takes two to tango. The Nazis were doing exactly the same to their tribe, surely. But it's only ever focusing on just the women.
Yeah, there was the belly in the
both ways, literally.
The belly and the blonde in the belly of the
blonde in the belly of the beast.
That's her. Yeah, she had a clip that was about how women who sleep with immigrants are like women who slept with Nazis, and they should be beaten and paraded in the streets, bring back the patriarchy. And it's just, to me, coming from Saudi Arabia, hearing this kind of rhetoric become more and more popular, especially in the atheist scene, it's like she's another weirdo, completely regressive person who Dave Rubin has promoted, has said he admired the work of, refuses to call regressive because only people on the left are regressive. But yeah,
even though they are regressive in the literal sense that they want to go back to what they imagine the 1950s was.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So it boggles my mind that I'm seeing like this weird Salafist shit being smuggled into the atheist scene now.
But exactly, it is. It's bizarre because they will attack Saudi Arabia because it's full of brown people, basically. But they want that kind of patriarchal society to exist here. It's very, very strange. I've always said before, if they could get over their racism towards brown people, they'd love Saudi Arabia. They should go there. Yeah. Please leave us the fuck alone.
Hey, Saudi Arabia has enough misogynists. Please do not send more that way.
Well, yes, exactly. But at least if it's only in one place, like the rest of we can escape. We can smuggle the Saudi women out, and they can all fucking kill each other or whatever.
They don't care about women from Saudi Arabia. I can tell you that.
Absolutely, yeah. I know for a fact that that's the case because they will only ever bring it up in reaction to something that a Western woman says.
Yes.
They never actually do anything about the issues of women in Saudi Arabia. They don't give a fuck about it.
No, in defense of some of the people in the atheist scene, I do know a few who actually do work with like atheists, and they do actually.
Yeah, of course, there will always be exceptions.
But that's an outlier, David. Come on.
Yeah. Oh no, don't get me wrong. They are outliers.
But there was a guy.
They're not exactly well liked within the contemporary atheist community.
There was a guy who built his brand on helping Saudi women who was outed by his own spouse as exploiting them and getting like inappropriate photos from them and stuff like that.
I know him.
So, I mean, it's a very depressing time. And it always goes back, like Jordan Peterson. Again, when I was watching your Manosphere videos, then I would click into find more videos from the people that you were talking about. Always there would be Jordan Peterson recommendations in between. And, there are some real, like, pickup artist types who clip his videos and put their own titles on them, right? Like, Why Women Like Jerks, Jordan Peterson. This isn't his own title, but he's talking about some weird shit. Or like, he says how lipstick is, men like women in red lipstick because of ripe fruit, because that's how we evolved.
Yeah.
Just weird.
Ripe fruit.
Well, he's got this. Yeah, because it reminds you of ripe fruit. It's bizarre. He's got these weird analogies like lobsters.
Okay, I've heard the theory that it's something to do with like it. I think it like resembles a vagina or something. I don't know, but like ripe fruit. What's that?
An apple?
Like at the very least, like I think it's something to do with like the coloration of a vagina when it's when a woman's.
Well, yeah, but surely it would only remind you of that if you tilt your head to the side.
What? I didn't get that.
I don't know. I don't know.
No, I missed that joke.
Like ripe fruit doesn't make sense. That like
the very makes fucking sense.
Yeah,
it's all bollocks.
So this is how he phrased it. As color vision evolved, then a positive feedback loop developed and fruit got redder and redder. And at the same time, women capitalized on that. Women capitalized on that. Listen to him. And that's partly what explains the association with Eve and apples. He's talking about women exploiting this situation. Come on. This is
not just that, but please do show me where it says apple.
It never actually does.
It doesn't. No, it doesn't say apple. It just says the fruit of the tree you shall not eat.
Yeah.
So he's not even good at Christianity, which is bad for a Christian, really. There you go.
But yeah.
Well, interestingly, a complete aside, but a random little fact for you. Did you know that the apple falling on Isaac Newton's head wasn't an actual apple? It didn't actually happen. It was an allegory for truth and knowledge.
The apple in what, sorry, was an allegory?
Isaac Newton's head.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh,
it was from a letter to his friend who asked him how he came up with the idea, or how gravity as a concept hit him, and he used the visualization from the Bible story of the apple representing knowledge.
Oh, I'm sure it was some woman tempting him to do something. Jordan Peterson will tell you.
Well, yeah, he was progressing with cultural Marxist ideology.
Well, no, I was just going to say, it definitely wasn't a woman doing that because Isaac Newton was gay. But anyway.
Oh, but it's still got to be a woman. Come on.
Get out of here with your like new Marxist ideology of Newtonian mechanics.
Exactly.
Geocentrism.
But since we're talking about...
We're not progressives. We just want to go back to the 1500s before this gravity nonsense came about. Yeah. When everyone was just floating about like normal.
Since we're talking about, fruit. I mean, this is a weird way to bring this up, but something edible, so it reminded me. Now, this is a weird, really disgusting term I've been hearing around in this incel scene. And it's roasties. Now, can either of you explain that for the audience? Why they call women that they consider to be sluts roasties?
Roasties?
No, you haven't heard that one? Then let me...
I've heard it, but I don't get it.
Okay, let me explain then. I thought you guys were the experts. So this is...
You've got me on this one, yeah.
So this is...
In Britain, a roastie is like a roast potato.
Yeah,
so that doesn't make sense to me at all.
Yeah, it's literally a potato.
Oh no! Here I think they're referring to roast beef. So I guess that's the different imagery. So there was this journalist who wrote a rebuttal piece to this horrendous New York Times piece. I don't know if you guys came across it, but it was the redistribution of sex. Yeah. So she was talking about how she came across this incel manifesto, which had some really disgusting demands on it. It's an article by Talia Lavin in the Village Voice, and I'll link it in the show notes. She goes, "Do you want to know how incels would like to redistribute sex? Take them at their word. Here's a quick segment from an incel manifesto that began making the rounds this weekend after it appeared on Bad Economics Reddit, and which lays out a few clear principles for a sex redistribution matrix. Among the ideas on offer are banning makeup, a means of feminine deceit, and suggesting a system of state-mandated sexual market value cards measured
Jesus Christ.
Oh no, oh my God.
Measured on a 1 to 10 scale. The proposal culminates in the following. Women with more than 9 sexual partners and single moms should be forced by the state to date and have sex with incels that can't get any women despite the above changes." So then she goes, "I found out what incels like to call women they consider slutty. The term is roasty, and it's short for roast beef, and it derives from a physics and anatomy illiterate understanding of female genitalia."
Can I just read a horrible website, but I think it sums it up rather well. Their top description for roasty. It's a female whose labia of their vagina resembles roast beef.
Yes, exactly. So
and
she's...
The quote, the way they use it in a sentence is, and this is fucking grotesque. "Dude, I went down on this roasty the other night. That shit was like eating an Arby's roast beef sandwich."
Yeah. So because she wrote this, she tweeted this little manifesto, she had incels tweeting photos of roast beef at her for hours. And so they think that having a lot of sex with a lot of friction causes the labia to stretch or something. That's just not how vaginas work. That's not how labia works. Even giving birth doesn't change the shape of your labia. I mean, the ignorance is astounding. These things are down to genetics, right? I don't know. Have you heard these types of theories from other guys before?
Only online.
Only online?
Yeah, only online.
Okay.
And the point I made earlier about the incels only really existing as like sniping from the sidelines, that sums it up nicely. They don't actually make their own content really. It's just when like a journalist mentions them or something, they'll go and post. Yeah, what a great piece of advocacy that is. Spamming with roast beef. Genius. You fools.
Just ignorance. I mean, hatefulness, obviously, but it shows how little they understand women, sex, and women's bodies.
Well, like I say, it's not... Unrequited love is one thing, but what these people are is just unlovable. They're just unpleasant, unlikable, unfuckable people.
I don't think it's necessarily always inherent though. I think you'll find and this is going to be my maybe a somewhat more sympathetic take, but it's not like blaming women or anything. Mm-hmm. I think the blame lies on pickup artists, on these online the Roosh V's of the world, these extremists, because like they show up if you Google very basic stuff, and they're recommended on YouTube quite a lot and stuff like that. So the story of Elliot Rodger is that he actually started out by watching a lot of this pickup artist stuff, and from what I can tell, what happens with incels is they go into this pickup artistry stuff, then they realize it's a con, but they only realize that the tactics themselves are a con and not the surrounding ideology that the tactics themselves are based on are the problem. So they end up buying into the misogyny, but without buying into the weird, creepy pickup tactics that pickup artists tend to use. So what you end up with is this guy who legitimately thinks he has no sexual market value, and thinks of these things in these terms, and obviously that's extremely toxic and just terrible for their mental health. I think a lot of the kinds of guys who get into this are really, really fucking gullible.
Yeah, exactly. The pickup artists are arguably more immediate danger to both men and women, because they teach men essentially the best ways to sexually abuse women. In essence, that's what's going on there.
But on the surface, if you know nothing about the scene, it seems kind of harmless, right? Like dating tips or whatever.
Well, exactly. Well, actually,
there are some people like that out there as well. But when you get into, but then there's a very specific subset of pickup types who are giving extremely dangerously bad advice.
Well,
Exactly,
yeah, Rush V is a rape advocate, is he not?
Rush V is rape advocate.
And a rapist.
People like
And a rapist.
And a rapist, yeah. Julian Blanc is another example. I would advise people to look into a thing he's got called the choke opener, which is where you grab
that's
women
Julian Blanc.
Yeah.
You grab them by the neck.
Yeah.
And
What?
You grab a woman upon first meeting a woman you want to have sex with, like a bar or something. You grab them by the throat, push them to the wall, and put your face right into theirs and speak. And it's just to show dominance and
What?
that this woman. Yeah, I mean that's just straightforward physical abuse, is what he's teaching them.
That would cause someone to call security. That's not a normal way to interact with women at all.
But there are videos of him online doing this. I've seen them. They exist. The police haven't. He should be in jail. He's a very dangerous man, frankly.
He was banned from the UK.
He was banned from the UK. He was banned from Australia. He's been banned from various places. But obviously, America can't ban him because that's where he's from. But they could certainly put him on some sort of list because he's a very, very dangerous man. And like I say, so he's of immediate danger to women in that respect. Not just him, but that, like I say, that kind of subset of really skeezy pickup artists. The kind of people who do dating tips and like self-improvement tips and stuff like that. That's fine. There's nothing particularly wrong or bad about that. And in many ways that can be healthy. But the PUA type people like Rush V and Julian Blanc and these various other Rollo Tomasi and these kind of people, they are really dangerous to men as well, though, because they cannot give you happiness. Even if some of these tips did work, which they don't, even if they did, all you would do is get laid. If you read Rush V's books, as I have, you will find that actually he's not a happy man in many, many ways. Sex for him is just the end goal. There's no love there. There's no relationship.
You didn't pay money for his books, did you?
Yeah, it's a status thing.
Yeah, exactly. He just notches on a bedpost.
Enjoy the act. He doesn't enjoy the act of it.
It's just mechanical. It's just mechanical. Getting laid. That's it.
Yeah.
It's almost as if he doesn't. Once his penis has entered the vagina, he might as well just pull out straight away and say, "Yeah, done." Because he doesn't actually enjoy the act of sex at all. But no, just to answer you, but I haven't paid a single penny to Rush V.
Good.
There are
I
other
sent you
methods.
those books.
What?
You sent me a few of them. Yeah.
Okay.
I've got various.
There are various other methods of acquiring those books for free, and let's just say I did acquire them that way.
Good. Paying for a rapist's book's not good. So
I just got hold of Jordan Peterson's book via one of those methods as well, and I'll be doing a breakdown of that. Although I do hope that's far less rapey than Rush's books, because I mean those are, to say they're tragic.
Well, it's going to be somewhat less rapey.
It's got to be.
Hopefully. And apparently he's going to teach me how to clean my room, so that's nice. That's good.
While smuggling in some good old-fashioned sexism, I imagine.
Exactly, yeah.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Polite Conversations. You can support this podcast by sharing the shit out of it, making some noise about it, or contributing via Patreon. Patreon.com/Nice Mangoes. No Ian Mangoes. Also, you can follow me on Twitter @Nice Mangoes. If you want to make a one-time donation instead of a monthly Patreon one, you can do so via PayPal. nicemangoes.blog@gmail.com. Remember, no Ian Mangoes. If you've got an interesting story and would potentially like to be a guest, you can email me there too. A special thanks to Dylan Beck for theme music, sound, and production help.